Your words are braver than you think. Emma Wallace stared at the handwritten note tucked between the pages of her journal, a journal that had disappeared for 24 hours after she'd left it behind at the Literary Bean Café. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she frantically flipped through the pages. Someone had read her most private thoughts, someone had discovered her secret stories, and instead of ridicule, they had left praise. Before I reveal who left this mysterious note and how it completely transformed Emma's life, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. This story about courage, connection, and finding your voice might just be exactly what you needed to hear today. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the very end to discover how a single forgotten journal saved not just one life, but an entire community's heart and soul. She glanced around the bustling cafe, studying each face. Was it the businessman, typing furiously on his laptop, the college student with paint-splattered fingers, or perhaps the quiet man in the corner, the one who always ordered black coffee and never made eye contact? Whoever it was had just shattered the careful walls she'd built around herself for years. 3 tables away, Nathan Brooks hid behind his newspaper, watching her reaction from the corner of his eye. He hadn't meant to read her journal when he found it fallen beneath a table yesterday. He certainly hadn't intended to write that note. But something about her raw, honest words had reached through the fortress of grief he'd constructed since his wife's death. Now he couldn't look away as emotions flickered across her face. Confusion, alarm, and something else. Was that hope? Little did either of them know that this single moment, a forgotten journal, a handwritten note, would not only change their lives forever, but would ultimately save the heart and soul of their entire community. Nathan Brooks, at 35, had already lived 2 lifetimes. First as the tech prodigy whose security software company had made him a billionaire by 30, and then as the grief-stricken widower who'd retreated from public life after losing his wife Sarah to cancer. He'd chosen Savannah for its quiet charm, the way history seemed to cushion the present, making his own pain feel smaller somehow. The Literary Bean had become his sanctuary, a place where he could exist without expectations. Lila Chen, the cafe's owner, respected his privacy while somehow making him feel less alone with her quiet understanding. Found someone's journal, he'd said to Lila the previous day, picking up the worn leather book from the floor. Must be Emma's, Lila replied, recognition in her eyes. She's in here almost every day, works at the Hamilton Library downtown. He should have handed it over immediately. Instead, his eyes caught a line on the open page. Sometimes I wonder if my words would mean anything to anyone but me. If the stories I write in secret would ever matter to someone else, the vulnerability in those words had pierced him. Before he could reconsider, he'd scribbled the note and tucked it between the pages. Now, watching Emma clutch the journal tighter as she left the cafe, Nathan felt a forgotten emotion stir within him, curiosity about another person's life. It had been so long since he'd felt anything but grief that the sensation was almost painful, like blood rushing back into a limb that had fallen asleep. Emma hurried back to the library, the journal pressed against her chest like armor. At 25, she'd mastered the art of invisibility, shelving books with silent efficiency, helping patrons with a quiet competence that never invited further conversation. Her colleagues appreciated her work ethic, but knew little about her beyond her love of classic literature and her impressive memory for the Dewey Decimal System. What they didn't know was that Emma's quietness wasn't simply shyness, it was anxiety that had built walls around her since childhood, walls that had grown higher after her father's death when she was 16. Words on the page were her only true freedom, stories her only adventure. And now someone had seen those private words and found them. Brave. The thought followed her through the day as she helped an elderly gentleman find books on gardening, guided a frazzled mother to the children's section, and organized a new display of historical fiction. Someone thought her words were brave. Maybe, just maybe, the stories she'd been hiding weren't meant to stay hidden after all. The following week, Emma returned to the Literary Bean with something she'd never had before: purpose. She positioned herself at her usual window seat, ordered her standard chai latte, but this time left her journal conspicuously open as she wrote a new entry. To my anonymous reader, I wonder if courage is contagious. Your note has me questioning if my words deserve more than the confines of these pages. Perhaps we all keep our best selves hidden from the world. She left the journal behind, accidentally once more, heart hammering as she stepped into the humid savannah evening. The Spanish moss hanging from the massive oak trees swayed gently, as if sharing in her secret. As Emma walked home, she remembered her mother's words from childhood. The bravest people aren't fearless. They're terrified but take the step anyway. For years, Emma had believed her anxiety made her cowardly. But perhaps this small act, leaving her words for a stranger, was its own kind of courage. Nathan found the journal just before closing, recognizing it instantly. When Lila stepped into the back room, he flipped to the most recent entry and felt a surprising flutter in his chest at the sight of the deliberate message. With barely a moment's hesitation, he penned his response. Some hide their light because they fear its power. Others hide because they've been burned. Which are you? As he wrote, Nathan wondered which category he fell into. After Sarah's diagnosis, he'd thrown himself into research, convinced his resources could save her. When that failed, he'd retreated completely, as if human connection itself had betrayed him. Yet here he was, reaching out to a stranger through ink and paper, feeling something awaken that he'd thought permanently dormant. This dance continued for days, their messages growing longer, deeper. Emma wrote about her dreams of becoming a published author and her paralysis at the thought of rejection. Nathan shared cryptic insights about success being an inadequate balm for loss. Each was careful to reveal only fragments, constructing walls with deliberate openings, small windows through which they allowed themselves to be seen. One evening, Emma wrote about her father, how he'd read to her every night as a child, different voices for every character, how after his sudden heart attack when she was 16, she'd continued reading their half-finished book aloud in her bedroom, just to hear his voice in her mind for a little longer. I never finished that book, she confessed. It sits on my shelf, bookmark still in place. Page 147. Nathan's response the next day was equally revealing. I understand unfinished stories. My wife collected hourglasses. After she died, I turned them all over one last time. They've all run out now, but I still can't bring myself to turn them again. Perhaps some endings are better left suspended. Meanwhile, Lila witnessed their paper courtship with quiet satisfaction. The literary bean had been her salvation after losing her younger brother to suicide 3 years earlier. Creating a space where people could connect, whether through conversation or apparently anonymous notes, was exactly why she'd poured her inheritance and soul into this cafe. You know, you two could just talk to each other like normal people, Lila teased Nathan one rainy afternoon after Emma had left and he was searching for the journal. I'm not sure I remember how to be normal, Nathan admitted, his usual confidence faltering. Besides, there's something pure about this. No expectations, no complications. You mean no chance of getting hurt, Lila corrected gently. My brother always said that the things most worth having require risk. Nathan's response died on his lips as the cafe door swung open and Mrs. Thornton marched in, designer handbag swinging from her arm like a weapon. At 62, she carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to deference. Lila, dear, she announced in a voice that matched her perfectly coiffed silver hair, elegant but unyielding. I've given it considerable thought and I simply must move forward with the sale. Savannah is experiencing a tourism boom, and this location is far too valuable to remain a simple cafe. The hotel developers are offering a very generous price. Lila's face drained of color. But Mrs. Thornton, we discussed a 5-year lease. The literary bean is just hitting its stride. We host local authors, book clubs. We're a community space. Community doesn't pay property taxes, dear, Mrs. Thornton replied, though a flicker of something, regret perhaps, crossed her face. You'll have 90 days to vacate, plenty of time to find another location. The cafe had fallen silent. every patron now unwitting witnesses to the literary bean's death sentence. Nathan sat frozen, coffee cooling before him. Across the room, Emma had returned for her forgotten umbrella, her wide eyes meeting Nathan's. In shared dismay, that night their journal exchange took on new urgency, and some spaces keep our souls alive. The literary bean is Lila's life work, not just a business. There must be something we can do. Nathan stared at her words for a long time, pen hovering above the page. Finally, he wrote, "Sometimes money speaks louder than passion, but voices joined together can create a symphony that drowns out even the coldest business proposition. What if we gave the community a reason to fight for this place?" And the next morning, Emma approached Lila directly, clutching a proposal. She'd stayed up all night drafting. What if we hosted a community reading event? Stories of connection, of healing, the very thing the literary bean represents. We could invite local press, show Mrs. Thornton that this cafe is irreplaceable. Lila's eyes brightened for the first time since Mrs. Thornton's announcement. "Emma, that's brilliant. We could hold it on the anniversary of our opening night, just 3 weeks away." What no one mentioned was the elephant in the room. 3 weeks away still left more than 2 months of the 90-day eviction notice. A single event, no matter how moving, would need to create a miracle to change Mrs. Thornton's mind. And, from his corner table, Nathan watched Emma's animated conversation with Lila, realizing with a start that he'd begun to care about these women and this cafe in a way he hadn't allowed himself to care about anything since burying his wife 2 years ago. The thought terrified him almost as much as it exhilarated him. News of the community reading event spread through Savannah like wildfire. Emma tapped her library connections, persuading local authors to participate. Lila reached out to her cafe regulars, creating sign-up sheets for 5-minute storytelling slots. Their shared energy was infectious, drawing others into their orbit of hope. Each day, more people signed up to share their stories. There was Robert Jenkins, a 70-year-old former English teacher who'd written poetry in secret for decades. Maria Suarez, whose cookbook of family recipes told the story of her immigrant grandmother's journey. And 16-year-old Tyler, who'd found solace in writing after his parents' divorce. The literary bean was becoming exactly what Lila had always envisioned, a place where stories could heal. Emma threw herself into organizing, her usual shyness temporarily overshadowed by her determination. Each evening she'd collapse into her armchair at home, exhausted but fulfilled, and write to Nathan about the day's progress. Their journal exchanges had become her anchor, the place where she could express both her hopes and fears without judgment. And today a woman signed up who lost her daughter last year. She said writing letters to her has been the only thing keeping her sane. "I'm terrified of failing these people, of not being able to save this place that saves them." Nathan, however, remained on the periphery. He continued his journal, conversations with Emma, offering suggestions and encouragement, but maintained his distance in person. One evening, as Lila locked up the cafe, she confronted him. "You know," she said, sliding into the chair opposite him, "for someone who writes such beautiful notes about courage, you're awfully afraid to put your money where your mouth is." Nathan flinched. "This isn't about money, isn't it? You've been coming here for 6 months, Nathan. I know who you are. Nathan Brooks, the tech prodigy who sold his company for billions and vanished from public life. You could buy this building outright and not even notice the expense." Nathan's jaw tightened. "That's not who I am anymore." "Then, who are you?" Lila challenged. "Because right now you're just a man hiding behind anonymous notes instead of actually helping." The words stung precisely because they contained truth. After his wife Sarah's cancer diagnosis, Nathan had thrown money at research foundations, experimental treatments, anything that promised hope. None of it had mattered in the end. Since her death, he'd come to see his wealth as meaningless, unable to buy what truly mattered. "I make anonymous donations to your brother's suicide prevention foundation every month," he said quietly. "Have been since I overheard you talking about him to that college student who was struggling." Lila's expression softened. "That was you. Those donations funded our high school outreach program. Nathan shrugged uncomfortably. Money's the easy part. It's showing up that's hard. When Sarah got sick, he continued, his voice barely audible, I thought I could fix everything. I had the resources, the best doctors, experimental treatments not available to the public. I was so certain that if I just tried hard enough, spent enough. He trailed off, lost in memory. But there are some things money can't change. After she died, I couldn't bear to be Nathan Brooks' tech billionaire anymore. That person failed at the only thing that really mattered. Lila reached across the table and squeezed his hand. And who are you now? I don't know, he admitted. Just someone trying to remember how to feel something, anything, again. Meanwhile, Emma was discovering her own form of courage. She'd drafted her reading piece, a story about a woman who learns that vulnerability isn't weakness but strength, and had begun practicing reading it aloud in the empty library after hours. Each time she reached the conclusion, her voice grew steadier. The first time she'd attempted it, she'd barely managed a whisper. By the fifth practice, she could project to the back row of empty chairs she'd set up. Progress was slow but undeniable, like water gradually smoothing stone. She thought of the mysterious N and his encouragement, wondering if he would be there to hear her words in person. But Mrs. Thornton remained unmoved. When Emma approached her at a community garden fundraiser, the older woman listened politely before sighing. My dear, I understand your passion, but sentimentality is a luxury of youth. This decision isn't personal. But it is personal, Emma insisted, finding boldness she hadn't known she possessed. The literary bean saved me. Before I found that place, my anxiety kept me prisoner. Words were my only freedom, but I had nowhere to really exist beyond. The library stacks. She took a deep breath. Please just come to the reading before you finalize anything. Mrs. Thornton studied Emma thoughtfully. You remind me of someone, she said finally. I'll consider it. As Emma turned to leave, Mrs. Thornton called after her. Miss Wallace. Emma paused. My husband was a writer, you know. Never published a word, always too afraid of rejection. I sometimes wonder if things might have been different had he found a place like your cafe. The admission stunned Emma. Perhaps Mrs. Thornton wasn't simply a businesswoman after all, but someone with her own complicated story. As the event approached, tension mounted. 3 days before, Emma and Nathan met face-to-face for the first time outside their paper conversations, when she literally bumped into him coming out of the cafe bathroom. Sorry, I wasn't... Emma began, then froze as their eyes met. Something about his gaze felt familiar, though they'd never spoken. Do I know you? Nathan hesitated, his heart racing as he considered telling her the truth. Instead, he simply extended his hand. I'm Nathan. I'm a friend of Lila's. Emma, she replied, shaking his hand. The simple touch sent an unexpected current through both of them. Are you coming to the reading? I'm considering it, he answered carefully. Emma smiled, and Nathan suddenly understood why he'd been drawn to her writing. Her smile contained the same quality as her words, genuine, luminous, slightly hesitant, but revealing something pure beneath. You should, she said, surprising herself with her boldness. Everyone has a story worth hearing. Nathan watched, her walk away, a war raging within him. He'd come to Savannah seeking anonymity, a place to grieve in peace without shareholders or tech journalists watching his every move. Now he found himself entangled in exactly the kind of human connection he'd been avoiding. That night, he wrote what he knew might be his final journal entry to her. What if the person you've been writing to isn't who you imagined? What if their cowardice runs deeper than ink on paper? Would their words still matter? Nema's response appeared the next day, and we are all more and less than what others imagine. Your words helped me find my voice. That matters, regardless of who holds the pen. But I think it's time we both step out of these pages and into the light. Join me at the reading. E. The night of the community reading arrived with a warm Savannah rain that made the cafe windows steam, and the world outside blur into watercolor smudges of streetlights and passing umbrellas. Inside, the literary bean hummed with anticipation. Every seat was filled, with additional listeners standing along the walls, clutching paper cups and expectant smiles. Lila had transformed the space, hanging string lights that cast a golden glow over the makeshift stage area. Really just a cleared corner with a microphone stand and a stool. Local press had arrived, including a columnist from the Savannah Morning News and a camera crew from the regional TV station. Emma stood in the back room, heart pounding so loudly she was certain others could hear it. She smoothed down her dress, a deep blue vintage number borrowed from a library colleague, and touched the worn edges of her journal. Tonight she would read from these private pages to a room full of strangers. The thought both terrified and thrilled her. Nathan arrived late, slipping in the back just as Lila took the microphone to welcome everyone. He scanned the crowd for Emma, but couldn't spot her among the packed bodies. Mrs. Thornton sat near the front, elegant as always in a cream-colored suit, her expression unreadable. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Lila began, her voice warm but carrying a slight tremor of emotion. "The literary bean was born from loss. My brother David's suicide left me searching for meaning, for connection. I wanted to create a space where people could share stories, find understanding, and know they weren't alone." She paused, composing herself. "Tonight, that vision comes full circle as our community shares pieces of themselves through words." The readings began. Vietnam veteran sharing how letters from home had kept him alive during the war. A college student describing how her grandmother's recipes connected her to heritage she'd never known. A retired teacher recounting how a single book had changed the trajectory of his life. Each story built upon the last, weaving a tapestry of human experience that filled the room with laughter, tears, and moments of profound silence. Then it was Emma's turn. As Lila announced her name, Nathan leaned forward in anticipation, suddenly nervous for her. Emma walked to the microphone, clutching her journal so tightly her knuckles whitened. For a terrifying moment she froze, scanning the crowd. Then her eyes found Nathan's. He gave her a small nod, and something passed between them. Encouragement, recognition, connection. Emma took a deep breath and began to read, her voice initially soft but gaining strength with each word. Her story, titled Paper Bridges, followed. A woman who leaves anonymous notes of encouragement for strangers after losing her ability to connect following trauma. Through these notes, she gradually finds her way back to genuine human connection, only to discover that the stranger she's been writing to has been helping her heal as much as she's been helping them. As Emma read the final lines, her gaze drifted once more to Nathan, whose eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Sometimes," she read, "our broken pieces align with another's in ways that begin to make us whole again. Not because they complete us, but because they reflect back the completeness that was always there, hidden beneath our scars." The cafe erupted in applause as Emma returned to her seat, hands shaking but heart lighter than it had been in years. Several more readers followed, but Nathan hardly heard them. He was too consumed by the realization that Emma's story, their story, had affected him more deeply than anything since Sarah's death. When the formal readings concluded, Lila returned to the microphone. "Before we end tonight, there's something important you should all know." Her eyes sought out Mrs. Thornton. "For the past year, the Literary Bean has been able to host these community events, our writing workshops, and our grief support. Groups because of an anonymous donor who believed in our mission, someone who understood that healing happens when we create safe spaces for people to be heard." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Lila continued. "I wasn't going to reveal this, but tonight seems like the right time for truth." She looked directly at Nathan. Nathan Brooks has been silently funding these programs, while asking for nothing in return, not even recognition. All eyes turned to Nathan, who shifted uncomfortably under the sudden attention. Emma's eyes widened with shock as she connected the dots. Nathan, her mysterious journal correspondent, had been supporting the cafe all along. Mrs. Thornton rose from her seat, her aristocratic features softened by something that looked remarkably like remorse. "Mr. Brooks," she addressed him directly, "I had no idea you were the anonymous benefactor Lila mentioned during our discussions." "It wasn't relevant," Nathan replied, finding his voice. "The value of this place isn't in its financial statements. It's in moments like tonight, people sharing their stories, finding connections that heal." Mrs. Thornton nodded slowly. "My husband was a writer," she revealed, her voice carrying in the hushed room. "Brilliant man, filled journals his entire life but never published a word. Fear, you see. After he passed, I found them all. 50 years of thoughts that never saw the light of day." She turned to Lila. "Perhaps we could discuss an arrangement. The hotel developers are interested in several of my properties, and this one," she glanced around the cafe, "this one might serve a higher purpose as it is." The room erupted in cheers and applause. Amid the celebration, Emma made her way to Nathan, clutching her journal like a shield. "It was you all along," she said, wonder and a hint of accusation mingling in her voice. "Why didn't you tell?" Nathan looked at her directly, no longer hiding. "Because the man who wrote those notes was braver than the man standing before you, and I wanted to be worthy of the conversation before claiming it." 6 months later, the literary bean had not only survived but thrived. Mrs. Thornton, in an unexpected turn, had offered Lila a 10-year lease at a reduced rate, with an option to purchase the building outright in the future. The cafes. Back wall now featured a story exchange, a board where patrons could leave anonymous notes of encouragement or small pieces of their own stories for others to find connection. Emma's first collection of short stories, Paper Bridges, had been accepted by a small but respected publishing house with a foreword written by Nathan that spoke of courage found in unexpected places. Her release party at the Literary Bean had drawn the largest crowd in the cafes. History. Nathan had slowly stepped back into the light in other ways too. He'd established a foundation that funded creative writing programs in schools and community centers across Georgia, focusing especially on areas where arts funding had been cut. When a tech magazine inevitably tracked him down for an interview about his comeback, he redirected their attention to the foundation's work instead. But perhaps the most profound transformation was the one least visible to others, the quiet evolution of two people learning to trust again. Emma and Nathan's relationship had grown from anonymous notes to coffee dates to long walks beneath Savannah's moss-draped oaks. They moved carefully, each aware of the other's fragility. There were still days when Emma's anxiety returned, when crowded rooms sent her retreating into silence. There were nights when Nathan woke from dreams of Sarah, grief as fresh as if she'd just left. But now neither faced these moments alone. On the anniversary of the community reading that had saved the Literary Bean, Emma and Nathan sat at what had become their table by the window. Rain pattered against the glass, creating that same watercolor world that had framed their beginning. "I have something for you," Nathan said, sliding a small package across the table. Emma unwrapped it carefully to find a beautiful leather-bound journal, nearly identical to her original one, but with one difference. Embossed on the cover were the words, "Your words matter." "For your next collection," he explained. "Though I hope you'll still let me read them before everyone else." Emma smiled, running her fingers over the embossed letters. "Only if you promise to keep leaving me notes." Across the cafe, Lila watched them with satisfaction as she served fresh scones to Mrs. Thornton, who had become a regular at their monthly community readings. "They look happy," the older woman observed. "They're healing," Lila corrected gently. "It's a beautiful thing to witness." Outside, the rain began to ease, sunlight breaking through the clouds to cast golden patterns across the cafe floor. Light finding its way through, just as courage sometimes does, in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes the bravest act is simply letting someone see who you truly are. Sometimes healing begins with 5 words scribbled on a post-it note, and sometimes the stories we're most afraid to tell are exactly the ones that will save us. Thanks so much for joining us for Emma and Nathan's story today. If it touched your heart, smash that like button right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe for more life-changing stories just like this one. Your support means the world to us. Until next time.